as essentially an undiagnosed blue baby whose heart defect wasn't addressed until I was almost 9, I was, shall we say, a bit slow in realizing my physical potential. Furthermore, as a risk-averse introvert, I was definitely more of a watcher than a doer, hesitant to commit to much of anything. But then at the age of 22, I ventured to look beyond Iowa and fell in love with mountains. Nothing has been the same since. Not counting my wife, mountains have been the love of my life. And as we all know, there is risk in love. Truth be told, both marriage and mountains can entail considerable risk. However, for my purpose here, perhaps it is best to focus just on mountains and avoid the risk of talking too much about my wife, especially if she's here. Accordingly, I will just touch upon a few of my own personal mountaineering experiences and how they inform my own view of life and risk. While I have enjoyed many immensely pleasurable experiences in the mountains, perhaps not surprisingly, it is the more tense moments that live most strongly in my memory. You know, the times when things went a little awry or worse. Let me just give 3 examples. Like being caught on a high rock wall and forced to bivouac on a small ledge about 75 feet below the summit of the Grand Teton in a freak August snowstorm, just hoping to survive the night and learning later that others didn't. Like taking an unroped fall down a long, steep snow and ice-covered slope coming off the summit of Colorado's Longs Peak on New Year's Day, finding my ice axe arrest not stopping me, hesitant to also use the front points of my boot crampons, which the books warn might catch and cause body flipping, but in desperation doing so anyway to finally stop short of a 300-foot vertical drop. Or like being on the belay end of the rope when my climbing partner fell 100 feet from Irene's arête on Disappointment Peak, aptly named as it turned out, in the Tetons, just missing to the left of going splat upon the ledge upon which I sat, a sticky wicket that, but nothing that a rescue helicopter couldn't eventually help address. To state the obvious and to be perfectly clear, we weren't climbing to have these or other downside experiences, but in taking the risk to do interesting things and pursue our goals as aspiring amateur mountaineers, sometimes untoward things did happen. Of course, a man's macho training would obligate me to equip that these events really got one's attention, and they did. But a broader human perspective might note much more. These events revealed not only one's vulnerability and limits, but also one's strengths. But even more than that, sometimes they disclose new understandings of self, perhaps not otherwise easily acquired. For example, I still marvel at the extreme exuberance, so seemingly at odds with the seriousness of the situation, that I felt in climbing that Grand Teton rock wall on those small, snowy, wet holes to be the last to join my wife and the other 2 climbers on that small ledge, thereby, thankfully, avoiding a night by myself stranded and perhaps hanging on slings on that wall in that snowstorm. Perhaps there is such a thing as an enabling dopamine rush or some such under duress. And perhaps full commitment does add a power of its own. To be precise, I should note that the exuberance was perhaps due more to the journey than to the destination, for on that ledge awaited little beyond dread and uncertainty of a long night ahead. But at least we could sit down, anchor ourselves against the possible shocks of the myriad lightning bolts, and share our fate and meager resources together. For some reason, that seemed important. And I especially remember, out of that long, cold, wet night of fighting hypothermia, with song shivers and the occasional shout, a revealed certainty that said, if only one of us were to survive, it must be my wife. There was no thinking involved, no pros and cons weighed, no internal mental dramatics felt, but instead just a quiet knowing and certainty that was disclosed from deep within me. For someone who lives mostly in my head, I still marvel at actually experiencing what seemed like a very real instinct at my core. Not that it would have superseded other moral convictions, I think, nor did it drive any particular plans, although I think it was perhaps not completely incompatible with the risky actions I took the next day to reclaim a stuck rope that was necessary to allow our self-rescue to continue. Stepping back from all of this, I understand that some hold the perspective, generally from a safe distance like an armchair, that climbers must be pursuing mountaineering in a need to court death. I would argue quite the opposite. For some of us it is, or was it, for me at least, more of a need to court life. It's not so much a seeking out of danger, but instead a seeking out of challenges that call for all of oneself to be present. It's an invitation writ large for blending life's two main dramas, being and doing. And if you bring your full being, your heart, your mind, your courage, your strength, ambition, humility, endurance, soul, and faith to the task of doing, one will hopefully not only survive, but also flourish and reach a sense of wholeness that informs and perhaps transforms your whole life. I know it did for me. And so that's my reflection on love, life, and risk, or at least a good part of it. As we all know, each of us must travel our own paths to that sense of wholeness and willingness to take risks for the life it brings. Mine just happened to be through the mountains. And while I may have occasionally taken a step too far, like T.S. Eliot alludes to, I am comfortable and maybe even a little proud being the person that was revealed or shaped during those mountaineering experiences, be it on the long, boring slogs or on the sharpened moments of high risk. Out of those ups and downs, I grew stronger, more focused, and with greater acceptance and love for the limited human being that I am. Both chastened and enriched, I eventually emerged from those mountains with enough courage to finally commit myself to what many of you have already courageously embraced, the risk of becoming a parent. But I'll leave that story of love and risk to another time. Thank you.